Hello again. I hope that you had a good lunch and that you are ready for the next sessions. We'll start up with Dörte Fouquet, Director at European Renewable Energy Federation in Brussels in Belgium. And Dörte, welcome. Dörte will make a presentation about Europe goes climate neutral next steps toward 2030. Dörte, I hope you are there. I can hear you. Good to see you again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very good and well.
Super.
Yes.
And we sent my presentation.
Yes.
We did send it. Yeah.
Yeah. Everything is all right. Just a moment.
Okay. Yeah, that's it.
Well, Dörte, we look forward to it. Please go on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Morten. Thank you, Folkecenter, for having me again at your seminars. I think the series of seminars you organized this year under very difficult, let's say, conditions is superb, is helping also the exchange of debate, is helping RF a lot, gives a lot of input. So I just want to give a little bit back, and it's a big bunch of things I have put together, as always, much too much in a way. But I hope the one or the other thing may be interesting for you, for the one or the other of you. So maybe many of you know me. So very briefly, I work for RF. I'm a lawyer, but I work for RF, and you can already do the next slide. Since over 20 years now, I helped setting it up, and RF is the voice of small and medium-sized producers of renewable energies in the European Union, with member associations from all over, and Eurosolar Denmark, and from the beginning Folkecenter were directly involved in our work, and many other associations, and they are all still members. We only lost one on the way, and it seems it comes back. So I can also say, maybe for the younger of you, I started actually to think about legal as a lawyer on energy system change when I entered the civil public service in Hamburg in Germany, and it was just in the weeks when Chernobyl happened. So that had marked my work from day one might say, and it has continued for renewables since a long time. So if we can continue, the next slide. Voila. So I would like first, we can continue. I would like first to look at the main messages. On the next slide, you can see that Europe has signed the Paris Agreement, the new Commission, and if you continue with the presentation, please. The new Commission is set to reach the European climate targets. You have all heard, and we spoke about it last time already, the new Green Deal initiated by our President, Ms. von der Leyen, and Vice President Timmermans, especially, but also others, and highly supported by DG Energy, DG Climate, Environment, and so forth. We all try to be to reach this 1.5 maximum degree increase of temperature by 2050. And these pathways is just for somebody who likes to look at graphs. We can continue to the next slide, please. So we want to have climate neutrality, meaning that we have to have almost net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Again, for your work, it's important. It's not only about CO2, it's greenhouse gas emissions, and that has to be kept in mind. Sometimes especially the fossil gas industry tries to find other equations. Agriculture tries to hide away, but it's about greenhouse gas emissions. At the moment, we do have a legislative proposal by the European Commission, which is already advanced in the European Parliament, and is I think this month, end of this month or next month, will be another council meeting on it. And that is, we change fairly new instruments, the governance regulation. I talked about it last time. And we will integrate in that regulation higher emission reduction targets for 2030. The Commission has put in 55%, but the European Parliament actually is asking for 60%. There's a big discussion if 60%. The Commission is a bit hesitant because she says they had also economic models and they think 50%, 55% is fine to reach our new pathway also in a sound economical way without too much strain. But for the 1.5 target, the majority of analysts, as we see it, as RF say, it's not enough. So we hope we can increase that and that it should be a minimum 60% target at least. So we can continue to the other slide, please. And to the next slide. It's there's a lot of messaging and there's a lot of good points having been put forward by the European Commission. There is a change of attitude, and I come also back to some interesting instruments the Commission came up with meanwhile. On the other hand, it has to be seen on the practical ground. What will member states really do to transform our economies in the way it is discussed on the European level? For example, we had the Renewable Energy Directive, which is ending this year, the RED I directive, end of this year. And this directive contains binding national targets. I think I have spoken about that a lot also with the Folkecenter event. But before Corona, many member states were far away from reaching that target. Even Germany struggled to reach its target and would probably not have reached it. Netherlands were far off. UK, okay, we cannot count UK really, but was far off also. France, many member states, important member states did not reach their binding target. So if Corona now helped, that is really not something they can be in any way proud of. It's not a policy success. We are talking about today's renewables, obviously, but we are also talking on the European level on modernization of the emission trading system, ETS. In my view, it's good to look more, to put more sectors into the emission trading obligation. As long as we have this system, one can discuss it, but it's a philosophical discussion. We have that system is established and we should use and enforce it as much as possible. The shipping sector, aviation, agriculture, that all needs to be integrated under the emission trading mechanism, especially, and I'm always wondering why shipping, who pollutes some of the big tankers more than a whole car fleet on the streets in a big country, why it's always under the radar. Maybe also because we have important shipping line interests also in Northern Europe, which may play a role. Transport policy overall is still unclear. I personally think that this new debate on hydrogen on European level and on member states level is a good debate as long as it is only based on green hydrogen. And countries such as Denmark, many northern countries with a high share of renewables, they can go and offer green hydrogen solutions soon. But the danger again is that others try to exploit longer the use of fossil gas or nuclear in the equation, and thus overall we would miss on our targets, especially when it comes also to sustainability. So the system change which we have in front of us, I mean, to decarbonize or GHGIs a European system by, let's say, 60% in not only, if we talk in planning, it's maybe 7 years until 2030. That's a high order. It's amazing, and renewables have to play the biggest role here, and efficiency, and that means, in my view, that member states should have under strict conditions that they cannot do dirty tricks, but member states who support renewables, they should have the utmost flexibility to do so. And I think it is not even time for state aid. It is not about state aid. It's about a general economic shift in whole societies and countries, and therefore it should be completely out of state aid scrutiny. I come later to a system immanent review of the state aid rules, because the one thing is that RF is asking for keeping it as a general economic imperative, and that means from our treaties and from our law, that means it is not open to DG competition scrutiny. But nonetheless, if we do not reach this understanding, and I really cannot see what infrastructure project bigger than the one we have in front of us could be there, where everybody would say this is a general economic interest necessity than climate healing processes. So we will come back to that during the next month and exchange on that probably further. We can continue on the next slide, please. So this very briefly, I will focus on two directives when it comes to community power and citizens' power, and that is the new Renewable Energy Directive, the recast, the RED II, which has to be transposed into national legislation by mid next year. And naturally, we have the Internal Electricity and Energy Market Directive, which has to be transposed for the beginning of next year. We can continue. I will briefly focus, we have talked about that, but very briefly, we have, strange enough, we have, which is very good in both directives, communities, energy communities as a focus. That hadn't been the case before in any of our legal of our legislation on European level. So we have the citizens' energy communities in the Internal Energy Market Directive, that is in Article 16, and we have the Renewable Energy Directive with its renewable energy communities. So citizens' energy communities, and we can continue the next slide. That can also be if some citizens, citizens put together by a CHP on fossil gas, that could be applicable under the, that could be following or meeting the definitions under the Energy Market Directive, but not under the Renewable Energy Directive, obviously. Again, we have now in the recast directive this acknowledgement of renewable energy communities. There has to be ensured in the national legislation that there's local control and ownership. They do not want to have hijacking of citizen cooperatives by larger energy companies or project developers. And the member states have an obligation to set up an enabling framework. So if you come from a country which is not going this way, and where you could read the national energy and climate plan of your country and you see there's next to nothing said about it, I think you could very early already next year start and alert the European Commission. We can continue on the next slide. So that, again, very briefly, you can read that for yourself. These are the definitions for the two types of citizens' involvement. We can continue. So under the Renewable Energy Directive, there has to be, the governments have to be have to help that our permit processes are very straightforward and fast. That means they should have a reasonable one contact point, that you do not have to run to many offices to get one permit for a small application, for example. So the whole permit application has to be facilitated. The length of the permit granting process, the Commission in the directive is even a maximum set, which I think is still very long, but from experience in many member states, I think it's good for clarity that they have put a maximum, for example, of 1 year for plants below 150 kilowatt. Repowering of existing plants, also there they ask for more simple notification procedures. This is very important because sometimes people have trouble to get a repowering permit because all of a sudden, which had been valid before, there are new arguments and from nature protectionists to say, no, now we do not allow for repowering, at least not with bigger turbines, etc. So there's a big zone of uncertainty. Can continue. Next slide. Yeah. So again, encouragement for new actors to enter the energy market is for me very, very important. Also, when it comes not only to owners, for example, of a house, but also to tenants who rent their flats, that they also should have an opportunity to be prosumers under this directive. And obviously, the renewable energy cooperatives and communities as such should play a bigger role. Just a second, David. Okay, next slide, please. So we have the national energy and climate plans under the directive as implementation tools. That has to be done under the governance regulation. Everybody has to do it, the member states. They have to give national progress report. The first is in 2023. And then every 2 years, and the Commission will monitor it. So that's the same logic we had also under our old directive. We can continue. They have to be updated. We as RF at the moment through a European co-finance project, but also outside of that, we will collect information from our members and try to inform the Commission as well when it comes to progress on the member states. So next slide. Yeah, that for the sake of time, you can read the analytical basis, but I will continue. Next slide, please. And the next slide. And this is for me now very very important. It's good to say we want to have minus 55, minus 60%, but we need a whole new tool set. One of the tools is very interesting. It's a new regulation which is already in force. It's the EU Taxonomy Regulation, and that might change access to finance a lot. There may be more financing for us, let's say for the good green energies, because there may be less financing for the polluting energies. And the goal is to have environmental performance standards of economic activities. And who is obligated at least to disclose and to report? So it's investors, companies, banks, large listed undertakings, insurances, and so forth. And the classification will be crucial to. It will be part of the question. For example, if the European Investment Bank would give money to some project, if private banks give money, if savings and loans place their money, or cooperative banks. So it's a real helpful classification tool, and we can continue on the next slide. You can read it for yourself, but what is really important is that there are 6 environmental goals with taxonomy. It's climate protection, it's adaptation to climate change, sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, transition to the so-called circular economy, as waste prevention and recycling, avoidance and reduction of environment pollution, and the protection and restoration of healthy ecosystems. Under that, you find several classes of activities, for example, do not significantly impair any other environmental objectives, meet the technology evaluation criteria, is compatible with a minimum level of protection for employees. It has to make a significant contribution to climate protection. So some activities might still be accepted for a certain period because they may not be an alternative. But now I come on the next slide. This is just the process, and there we see we have, or the directive foresees, or the regulation foresees, in order to have more clarity, that the Commission can come up with so-called delegated acts. So the Commission is doing that at the moment. There is a team of experts advising the Commission on several delegated acts. And there were two industries who absolutely wanted to crash into the taxonomy regulation, which are not covered yet, and that is nuclear and that is fossil gas. It seems also fossil gas will also not under delegation play a role. Nuclear is still open because the Joint Research Center of the European Commission is just organizing preparatory expert study on this issue for a delegated act by the Commission. What I find a little bit weird is you make the one institution of the European Commission asking for a neutral evaluation or an objective evaluation, which is the one who is responsible for nuclear research and nuclear promotion. So that's, for me, a little bit bizarre. Let's say that. We can continue on the next slide. This is again what the delegated regulation might be able to do. And there's one point that hydropower, especially small hydropower, was attacked not to be possible and open for taxonomy coverage, let's say. Now that seems to be in the delegated act. The first, as it is proposed, hydropower is seen as enabling climate protection, but they have introduced very detailed criteria. For example, life cycle greenhouse gas emission standards, mixed pump storage power, connection to free-flowing water resources, and so forth. And fossil gas energy production in this delegated act is seen now as a transitional activity, but the life cycle emission has to be lower than 100 grams CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. In that respect, it's almost not possible for the vast majority of fossil gas applications. So it's quite okay. So we can go on the next slide. Yeah, the technical screening procedure, there will be always revised. There's a time frame, and there will come further proposals for delegated act, which is delegated act is on one side a flexible tool, because the Commission can herself correct it over when she sees a year later it's not working or whatever. On the other hand, it's fairly undemocratic in a way. The rules are set in the regulation, but if the Council of Ministers or the European Parliament does not reject a delegated act proposal, it's within 2 months it's accepted. And so we need to be very vigilant. We need to be part of the permanent platform of advice to the Commission, and that's not so easy to get access. So next slide, please. Yeah, so that's why RF, maybe go on the next slide again. We have a special position. You can read it on our webpage with specific criteria. Yes, you can continue. We certainly look into gas. We are very vigilant on nuclear. And we do not like now the extra criteria for small hydro power. At least I think it should be in line with the criteria set under established European law, like the Water Framework Directive. And so we are still a little bit working on, or a lot working on this field, and we should continue with the next slide. So in the end, I will come back to the state aid guidelines and the Green Deal. You know, I had said our position that we don't think it's a state aid issue, but it's crucial that that the state aid scrutiny should be an enforcer of transition and should not be a stumble block. And so there must be very clear new guidelines in supporting green investment. The guidelines, very, very briefly, again, they are not issued by the European Parliament or the Council. They are only issued by the European Commission, and their sense in principle is good. It's like a guidance to the European Commission. So when she has a state aid case from the same or similar sector, that she comes also to same and similar conclusions, and that her reasoning is based on some criteria which are published in those guidelines. So far, so good. Only RF was struggling, and many others also, but especially RF very much with the current guidelines when it came to renewable energy, because the current guidelines, they were valid between 2014 and 2020 and are prolonged until next year due to several reasons, including Corona. The current guidelines all of a sudden in 2014 introduced that there should be, before any support mechanism is given by a member state, there should be an auctioning and technology neutral auctioning and bidding process installed. This thing was not foreseen at all in the European Renewable Energy Directive, and we found RF went up to the European Court and said that it is to the General Court of the European Union, and said that this is an abuse of power, and it's beyond what the Commission can do under our principles. Unfortunately, the European Court took the case of not being admissible because they argued RF as an association was not directly and negatively and singularly affected by the guidelines itself. So that's another problem. I can talk about that for many hours on access to justice in those cases in Europe. We can continue the next slide. So technology specific aid must be the rule and not the exception. That's what RF is asking for. We find it absurd, this technology neutral scheme, and we can go on the next slide. And we are of the opinion that this bidding process should be phased out. We have given several examples, at least for small and medium-sized renewable energy installations. There should be still direct support, direct feed-in premium. This should be possible without going through lengthy auctioning processes. We can continue. The hydrogen strategy, very briefly, I have touched upon it. It's the other goal of the Union to reach our climate goals. And we have there also several interim steps, which I have put here. And they hope that hydrogen becomes financially viable for the next decades in order to help reaching the target. We can go to the next slide. Naturally, this is what is also important for us when we are in our localities with small and medium-sized projects, or we are small and medium-sized companies who want to change. What is very important is that the programs, the European structural funds and the Corona recovery programs, that they are enhancers to system change. So this is now a lot of text, and I don't, for the sake of time, I think I don't want to be warned too much, but we have an interesting program recovery assistance for cohesion and the territories of Europe. It's REACT EU, which has 47.5 billion euro. If the new household is finally voted, that means if Hungary and Poland can be put into some order. It is very, very interesting because it gives full flexibility to use these resources to revamp the economy. So if you say my community wants to be 100% renewable and CO2 free, so we have these and these projects, you should try to, and we create with that and that job. You should try also to approach your government or your regional entity responsible for the structural funds and try to get money, because it goes even retroactively. So if you have already started this year something under the pandemic to have another view, you might even get retroactive money for that. So please look into this REACT program. Next slide. Yeah, that is the other thing in the end I wanted to refer to. It's the just transition mechanism. That is, everybody says, oh yeah, but that's, for example, it's not for Denmark because you do not have any coal mines, or for example, or it's more for the regions like in Poland, in Spain, in Germany, etc., which still have a lot of coal mining activities. That's for sure, but it's not only the Just Transition Fund is not only for those regions. It's also if you have a steel mill in your neighborhood and that steel mill could become much more efficient in using renewables, using the process heat, etc. They could also have access to Just Transition money. But yes, the majority will be for this 100 European regions with roughly 240,000 employees in that industry. Then we can continue. So I said here's more the details, which you can, I'm sure Folkecenter will put that online, so you can read all that. I think for the sake of time, we should continue. Also that, yes, it's by public loans, it's made by the European Investment Bank, Invest EU. There are a lot of mechanisms which are already established, which will be the ones who give the money to the localities. So next slide, please. And we're almost at the end of my presentation. This is the link between member states. Member states have to find the money, and then they get on top money and guarantees from the European level. Next slide, please. Yeah, in the end, I would like to say what you all always have, and these are, next slide, please, the administrative barriers. We all live with those barriers and have to overcome them. There is the grid issue, there is the economic framework. So these are things we figured out as main barriers under this R&P projects. And this is, if you want, the kaleidoscope from the European Union member states. Next slide. We also say that in some countries the administrative and the grid issues may become soon the major barrier to embrace to prevent embracing more renewables in the power market. And the next slide, please. And again, I told in the beginning, Article 16 of the Renewable Energy Directive asks that member states have to decrease the administrative procedure complexity. And you see how obviously difficult this is, as it makes up a big part of barrier responsibility. And also spatial and environmental planning, integration of renewables, that's a big issue. That's probably you touch upon that in the conference, but it's in many countries now to build new windmills. There is this misunderstanding, in my view, that people say that our Nature Protection Act, like the Flora, Fauna, Habitat Directive, that they shelter the one bird which might be killed by a wind turbine and not the species. And the same with the water power, that maybe one fish doesn't make it through the trap, through the ladder and so forth, and will be killed. And that is the objective of these directives, and that's completely rubbish. The directives are there to overall increase and protect the species. So when we look again, who is doing what, if NOx-rich agriculture influencing the rivers, diminishing the fauna of the fish, that's the biggest stumble block, the air pollution into rivers from industry and from agriculture. But then to say, I look at one single fish, which unfortunately might be killed, this is absurd. Then we should all kill our cats because they kill more birds and sometimes also fish. Then we all can do that with turbines or with, and then we should stop driving cars. So there is an overboard, exaggerated misinterpretation of our legislation, and that we have to overcome. So next slide, please. Again, that's just some pictures, yeah. And with that, I would like to stop at this point, and naturally, I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dörte. We are a bit short of time, and I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but will you stay here with us, or we will try to make a discussion about 4 o'clock, 4:30?
Yeah, 4:30. Then I might be only able to call in, but I will try.
Okay, because well, you know,
maybe it will be just working.
Are there one very short question? Then we'll take it in, and in the meantime, I'll just say that we'll share all the presentations, but the link will be sent to those people who registered. Please register on folkecenterevents.net if not already done. So that was the words, and I think it was very good what you said, Dörte, with also to follow up on a very good presentation yesterday from Jutta Paulus, who also came into some of the things you've been pointing out here today. So thank you for that. It seems as there are no questions right now. So thank you very much, Dörte.
I try to come back in later.
Yeah, okay, that's good. And then
Tschüss, Morten.
Yeah, okay. We will continue now.